Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. This is James Simon, Vice President for Collections and Services at CRL, and I just wanted to welcome all of you who are currently joining us for this afternoon's special webinar on CRL resources and OCLC discovery services. I am just serving as a moderator for this, and it is my pleasure to introduce in a minute Amy Wood, who's our Director of Technical Services. She joined CRL in 2002 and has been slaving away at our catalog and discovery for a number of years now. So this is one of a proposed series of webinars to look at the changing landscape of discovery. And just by context, wanted to mention that the discovery of CRL resources has been an ongoing challenge for our membership since essentially the members' founding. As essentially the first remote resource library, the issue of how to discover what was available through CRL and getting access to it has been the source of many discussions throughout the course of our decades-long history. From the 60s to the mid-1970s, CRL produced an online book catalog, which towards its end spanned 16 volumes. The advent of machine-readable records in the 1980s allowed us to produce a microfiche edition of that catalog, and in 1981 we began entering our records into OCLC and tape loading them into Arlen, which allowed a measure of greater discoverability for our member institutions. By 1989, CRL was offering tape loads of its records for members who are interested. That spanned some 235,000 records on 4 magnetic tapes. And in 1992, CRL introduced its first online public access catalog, which of course was available on the internet by 1994 through Telnet, through CRL's Gopher, for those of you who might remember that. By 1996, we had established a Z39.50 connection to essentially supplant the tape loading. And then later in the 1990s and early 2000s, we began to implement record loading again for those members who wanted to load our records. So this has been a long trajectory of sharing our records for access, and the implementation of discovery services at the majority of our research library members introduces another layer of complexity. And Amy Wood will present about our collections and, at least in the instance of OCLC's discovery services, how to find CRL resources and maximize your own configurations for that. Just a few quick housekeeping notes. We are available through the phone as well as voice over IP, so you should have access through one or the other. If you're on the computer and you can't hear us, try dialing us in via the phone, but it's recommended you don't use both options at the same time. We've also muted all of the phones on entry, but we welcome your comments and questions via the chat function in the WebEx platform, and we will be addressing those questions or comments that you may have towards the end of this session. I'll now turn this over to Amy Wood. Thank you.
Good afternoon. This is Amy. I really appreciate your participation in the webinar today. It is crucial that we work together to help your patrons access CRL's unique collections. As James said, it can be very difficult to get our records out in front of your patrons in order for them to access the collection. But all of CRL's 1.45 million records are available in WorldCat, which makes it, I think, a unique tool or way of accessing the collections. And OCLC's suite of products offers a variety of options to help make the records more accessible. So this webinar will focus on enhancing the discovery of CRL records, both electronic and physical, through WorldCat Discovery and OCLC's Worldshare Collection Manager. OCLC has made a number of recent improvements to the WorldCat Discovery service that make CRL records more visible now than they were when the product was first introduced. There's less bundling of the records. Originally, when the product was introduced, we had a very difficult time finding CRL records because they favored records that had more holdings attached to it than not. So if there were multiple records in WorldCat for similar or the same type of resource, our records tended to get hidden because we have because more than half of our collection is held by 5 or fewer libraries. So it made surfacing the records difficult. But the changes that they've made, including less bundling of records, less focus on holdings attached to the records, and more control over the links in the MARC records, really help surface CRL resources. And also, Worldshare Collection Manager can help you surface CRL's growing body of electronic resources, or help you easily obtain MARC records for all of CRL resources to load into your local catalogs or to optimize within WorldCat Discovery. We've been offering files of our records on a quarterly basis to all of our members for close to 10 years now. But I think you'll find that the Collection Manager offers you an option for getting our records if you would like to load them locally without on your own, unmediated, without our help. So for the webinar, I'll start with a brief overview of CRL's collection, because I think it will factor into your use of the Worldshare Collection Manager. And I'll highlight some important features in WorldCat Discovery and Worldshare Collection Manager. And we'll walk through the Collection Manager and knowledge base so you can see firsthand how to go about it. So first, our overview of CRL's collection. So as you can see, most of CRL's 1.45 million records are for physical resources. A really small percentage is for electronic resources, but those electronic resources get a great deal of use. So you can see that even though the collection is small, it's very important to our members. And it's also a collection that is growing every day. As part of our ILL service, we digitize many of the resources that are requested by our members, so rather than sending them out physically. So that small percentage grows a little bit every day. And within the physical collection, the largest part of that physical collection is our dissertation collection. It's over 800,000 titles. It is largely unique in the world, and is all from non-U.S. Countries. The next largest group is monographs, and we have serials and newspapers. And again, just like the electronic resources compared to the physical, the newspapers are a very small slice, but those are a very important collection. And we've seen with our digital service that more and more members are requesting newspapers from us rather than the monographs. As more and more monograph collections are digitized as part of mass digitization projects, that newspaper collection becomes more and more important here. In terms of our languages and countries, there's just a list of the top 12 for each. English is at the top of the list, probably no surprise for languages. Germany is at the top of the list for the countries, and that has a lot to do with the dissertation collection as well. For CRL's e-resource collection, the percentage of, this is just a distribution of the percentage of monographs and serials, far more monographs and have been digitized, and that's in part because the program for digitization was designed in the beginning to address the needs of lending our monographic collection. But as more and more requests were coming in for serials and newspapers, we started to shift over a little bit. And most of the e-resources that we were published in the 20th century, and I think that mirrors the larger collection as well, so probably no surprise there. In terms of the languages and the countries, they're a little bit different than the overall collection. English is still the top language, and the United States the top country of publication, but India as number 2 is different than the overall collection. So I think these are interesting to know, because these are the types of index queries that you can do in the Worldshare Collection Manager to pull records from the WorldCat. So now, I guess for the second part of the webinar, we'll talk a little bit more, or we'll focus on the different products or tools that OCLC has in terms of the Worldshare Collection Manager, the WorldCat knowledge-based collections, the query collections, and WorldCat Discovery itself. And I have to say, when I first started looking at the different products, I found it very confusing. Everything had either WorldCat or Worldshare, and I wasn't always quite sure where that was supposed to be applied and how they related to each other. But they really do work well together. If you think of the most important thing, I think, is to remember that the WorldCat database, which is the most, I think probably the most valuable bibliographic database in the world, is behind all of the different tools that they use. So you access that database along with other resources through all of these tools, and they all complement each other. So in terms of the discovery services, it's a single search of WorldCat and central index of e-content collections. It allows some interface configuration, which can highlight access to specific electronic content, and it provides information about item availability for physical collections. And it works in tandem with the interlibrary loan for easy borrowing. And this is something that your patrons would use on your end if they would log in to our configuration of WorldCat. They can't use the ILL there. But just to give you an idea, for the searching our interface, I've put the URL for that down below. For the configuration for the discovery, you do need to go into the OCLC service configuration, and you would all of the items on the bar on the left-hand side of that of the rectangle in the back you have to address all of those things. But I think in terms of discovering CRL resources, there are two that are the most important. The first is the relevancy and scoping, which are on the slide right now. And the important decisions here, I think, are whether or not you would include CRL in the search that you focus your patrons on. Would you scope this just to search your library, or would you do the entire WorldCat database? Because if it's just focused on your titles, your holdings, CRL won't surface that way. So the best thing to do, if you can, to include CRL resources in the search in discovery, is if you can purchase a group add-on or use the WMS for your ILS. Those are two options where you can include, you have an extra sort of level where you can scope to just your library or include CRL as a group member and not have to have us with the rest of the world. There's also a choice for your search results, and whether or not you want to limit it to just or favor your library holdings and relevancy, or just your library holdings. So I would say those are the two things that you should play around with and ensure that you're getting the right results that you want in order to find CRL resources and not just your own libraries. The second, I think, very important thing item for configuring for the system in order to find and access CRL resources, and this is primarily to access the digital resources, is this full text and open access links. I think you want to include the links from the WorldCat knowledge base in both the detailed record page and the search results page. And then they have other options for, including links from other contributors to WorldCat. You can either keep them on or not, depending on how the focus for your library. And I think the fact that they give us this choice now is a great enhancement. I mean, what we found with some of the Google links in the records is that our links were just getting buried, beneath a long list of 856 with Google links in them, and so giving your patrons the option of which links you want to include in these, I think, is extremely helpful. And in the Worldshare Collection Manager, they do even give you a choice of which links to put first. So if you've configured the system to include CRL, and you have used the knowledge base and the collection manager to attach your holdings to CRL's Digital Holdings, this is the type of result I think you're looking for. You want to see that it's held by your library, because I think that will encourage your patrons to click on the View Online button or to follow the link to the material. I think this, for electronic resources, I think attaching your holdings to the material is very important. And of course, the View Online button is very helpful. And this is just the search results for a search for a title that's we only have in physical form. We haven't not digitized this yet, and I think this is a terrific enhancement for WorldCat Discovery, that you can see the availability of all of our resources down to the item level. And in this case, because it's a physical resource, this happens to be a microfilm set, but in this case, I don't encourage our members to attach their holdings to our physical collections, rather to use the scoping or the relevancy to pull CRL's records up to the top of the search results. And the reason why is I think it can complicate ILL services a little if your holdings are attached. And I think the work that everyone is doing for with shared print collections and print archiving, it just becomes very difficult, very misleading when multiple libraries have attached their holdings for the same resource. So in terms of the physical, we don't encourage this, but look to the scoping and the relevancy to pull these up. So so the other tool that will help you surface CRL resources is the Worldshare Collection Manager. And this is a tool that helps you find and access metadata and records from the WorldCat knowledge base and WorldCat for electronic and physical resources. At first, when I started looking at this, I thought, because of its association with the knowledge base, that this was primarily for electronic resources, but I think this can be a really valuable tool for our physical collections too. And we have been in the process of creating collections in the knowledge base. None of them are public yet; they're all private, because we continue to add the resources to them. This is the one drawback to creating the collections on your own, is that once you make them global, you have to add each record manually, and we want to put as many of the current electronic resources in there in an automated way as we can. So we've been working on the monograph collection, and we have just under 20,000 titles in that. So that one, I believe, will be completed and available to you this week. The serials and newspapers will take a little bit longer because of the KBART format in which we have to upload the data. We have to, and because of the way we have created our digital collections, which is to say we've been responding to ILL requests, we don't have long complete runs of holdings. We have lots of gaps in our holdings, and we have to account for that in the KBART metadata. So for the collection manager, there are two types of collections. One is the knowledge-based collection, which is for the electronic material. And as I already mentioned, that we have created 3 collections, intending to separate them, knowing that it was such a larger amount of monographs rather than in comparison to the newspapers and serials. We wanted you to be able to have the choice, have an easy choice for what you downloaded or what you used. So the 3 collections are the monographs, serials, and newspapers, and they will be part of the global collections. And we encourage you to add your holdings to those through the system, to download the KBART metadata, and create local lists or use them in local systems if you are able, and request the delivery of the MARC records for downloading and loading into your own catalogs. All of that you should be able to do in the collection manager. So the other type of collection is a query collection, and this is the one I think has great promise for understanding what's in the CRL collection. I know it's been a long time since I have done any serious cataloging myself, but I was always frustrated with Connection or the other cataloging tools, in that I always it was never as part of the sort of catalog, the book in hand kind of thing. But if I were doing some research on something on one of our members, or we're looking into a variety of larger numbers of records, that it was always frustrating that there was a limit. But I think with the query collection, there seems to be, while there might be a limit in the size of the file, there doesn't seem to be a limit in what you can, the number of records that you can acquire for a collection. So you can create a query collection with an index search, and the index search can be as simple as just CRL's OCLC symbol, which is CRL, or you can further limit that search by adding additional indexes in the search. And I was looking at the documentation that OCLC has, and there are close to 100 different indexes that you can search on, and within each of those indexes, multiple terms. So I think there's a long list of ways you can sort of investigate CRL's collection and compare it to your own. So if you do use this service to download the records and load them into your local catalog, or would prefer to use the service that we already provide, I think it is one of the best ways that you can get our records out in front of your patrons. So so even though in this webinar we're focused on OCLC's products, don't underestimate really the value of having our records in your local system. It really is one of the best ways of providing access to our collection. So now I am going to switch over to our I'm going to go online and go to the collection manager and just kind of walk through that with you. So if you'll just bear with me for a minute. There we go. So now I've already logged in, and just to make sure that we could get in today. But once you do log in to the Worldshare, you'll want to click on the Metadata tab in case it isn't already highlighted there. And I think the best thing to do if it's the first time that you're accessing the system is probably to go in and create those institutional settings that will really help you access all the records and the resources. Each of the collections itself has a certain number of settings, some of which I think can override your institutional settings, or you may want to look at them both if in conjunction with each other. But there are some basic things you'll want to do, I think, to start up, particularly if you're looking for CRL's collections. So you certainly want to add your OCLC symbol. In terms of the WorldCat holdings, you have a choice. You can add your holding symbol to the records through this system, and if you do wish to do that, then you would want to click yes and make sure that the symbol you see there is the proper one. If you require the proxy and authentication, you want to do that here. And in terms of WorldCat discovery, this is mostly for serials, so we don't have anything to show here today, but you'll want to make sure that this works with the system as well. For obtaining MARC records from either WorldCat or the knowledge base, you will want to go through here and enable the MARC records for delivery. And once you click on that, all of these options appear, and you can customize the records that you receive according to your needs. You have the choice of what kind of for your updates and what type of updates you want to receive records for. So it's an ongoing service, not just a single one-time download. And then you have your record delivery options. I was just experimenting with this yesterday, and I think we'll see how I'm curious to see how this daily works. I know the first time when I did the search for all of CRL records, I realized I was not going to get, there was no immediate gratification. I was not going to get 1.45 million records immediately, and and I suspect it will be several days for that first download. So don't be surprised. Don't think you've done it wrong if you don't immediately see all the records appearing in my files over here. If you do choose to download the records or to get regular updates, you'll want to set up the reports. And these will help you, these will just alert you that you are getting, that the records are ready. It does require an authorization code and then an email address. And then you have a couple of different choices. But these work together, and I think these will be extremely helpful. And I think in the work that we've done with the print archiving of the serials, we've done a lot of work with reviewing what happens with records over time. And I will say we recently ran all of CRL's records against the OCLC WorldCat database and found that about 3,000 records needed updating in terms of OCLC number or ISSN, or there were just local cataloging choices that they made back in the early days of the online catalog that don't sync with what we do now. So I think it's always good to view these records as live, as being a part of the changing data scene, I think. So once you finish the settings, I think then you're ready to kind of go ahead and search for the collections. I wanted to do a search of our partner LLMC's collections just to show you what it looks like when you don't have your holdings on a record. Since I've already created all the collections for CRL, our holdings are on them. So I just wanted to do a quick search. When you do, you'll want to make sure that this box is not checked, that my selected collections box is not checked. because you just won't be able to retrieve it if you don't. So this is the LMC Digital Collection. If you click on here, it will tell you a little bit, just some basic information about the collection. You'll see a list of the titles, and if you can click on one of the titles to get more, to find out more of the metadata that's behind them, and you can see the OCLC number as well as a website link, which will take you directly to the LLMC website. But you can see over here that this title, and in fact all the titles in this collection, are not held by my library. So if I want to have just this title in my collection, I could select this title or select any number of them, or I can select the entire collection. It also has a search within that allows you to pull together a smaller list of records that may have something in common, and select just those. So now I'll just go into the CRL holdings or collections, and in this case I am going to click that My Selected Collections box, and the reason for that is because these collections are not public at this point. I wouldn't find them if I don't. But as soon as we make them global collections, you'll be able to find them. So I've actually created 5 collections, 2 of these query collections, which include our entire database of records, and 1 for our JSTOR, our JSTOR art print archive, and then the 1 for the monographs and newspapers and serials. And you can see I made them all customizable, so that you can choose. You don't have to accept the entire group of the entire collection. If you want to pick and choose in the collection, you can. So if we click on the monographs, you can see again the list of records that are in there. You can see over on the far right that they're all held by my library, and you can use the system to remove your holdings from WorldCat. So if I were to delete the title here, I actually am deleting my holdings in WorldCat. So I think this is something to be wary of. I think, particularly if you happen to hold the same title that we have. I think you'll want to do some experimenting with that to see if your holdings are still on there or not. If you've added this collection, if you've added your holdings via this collection, but you already have them again. So it's just something to be aware of, and I think to do some experimenting before you start deleting a lot of titles or collections. But you can use this to search within. As I said, it has all these filters at the top, but because I've already essentially filtered the collection or categorized the collection as just monographs, these filters are probably not helpful for that. But certainly this search within, so if I do a search for women, we get this, I think, a very interesting title, Basketball for Women. And there's just the basic metadata for that record. And if we want to click to the website, it should take us right to our digital delivery system, and there are no copyright issues with this, so you can just go ahead and access the collection, and there you go. For the same, the OCLC number, you can click on that, and that should take you to your WorldCat discovery, so you can see it online. You can see that View Online button. You can see more information, the full bibliographic record, and who else holds that material. that book. So the other, I think, so in addition to making a choice about whether or not you're going to keep your holdings or you're going to attach your holdings on here, there are other choices you can make regarding this if you do attach your holdings. And then whether or not you choose to download the MARC records in addition to being able to download the KBART. That would be the other, I think, choice you would want to make in here. And in terms of obtaining the KBART metadata, you would just go over to this More Actions and download and choose which format. In terms of the file encoding, I would encourage you to use the UTF Unicode or the text for Excel. That many of our resources will have non-Roman characters, and that's the one that OCLC recommends, and I would, from the testing that I've done, I would agree with that. So I think those are the main features that I wanted to point out in the collection manager. You can use the record manager for doing your cataloging, so you don't have to bounce back and forth between connection and collection manager. So I think this tool has a great deal of promise, and I think as we go forward and sharing records and sharing data becomes more and more important, I think being able to access larger numbers of records from our partners and being able to query the records will become more and more important, and this will be a good tool to use. And actually, having said that, that reminds me that I did want to show you the one thing with the query collection, and just show you how just to show you where I put that, the index. So this WorldCat selection criteria is where you put that index query or search. So I think I am now going to leave the sort of online part of this and stop sharing that. And there we are. So back to so we just have we know that was a lot to go through, so we just have a list here of some basic recommendations to show. And we will, OCLC has a great deal of information on its website for working through these different systems and for configuring, for doing the querying, for the downloading of records. So I would really encourage you to explore those tutorials. And when we make these slides available to you, we will make sure to add a number of links and other tools that we think will help you along this way. So well, here's just a list of additional resources, but thank you very much for, again, for participating. And I hope if you do have any specific questions, you'll reach out to us, and we're very happy to work with you on this.
Thanks, Amy. This is James here for a bit of the wrap-up and discussion. If there are any questions or comments, please do submit them through the chat function on the WebEx. We do have a number of people who expressed interest in this webinar and the specific topics. We tried to address as many of your interests or questions that you had when you signed up. Maybe I'll ask Amy a quick starter question in terms of learning from our members as to whether they have set up CRL records or intend to set up CRL records. Is there a good way to communicate or to form a group of best practices in this? Do you recommend that? Obviously, they should contact you, right? But what are you looking for, maybe to hear from our members if they're following your instructions? Do you want to see if they can share their local configuration snapshots to help us improve this?
I think the main thing. I think one thing we'd really like to hear about is how this helps your patrons. I think that's one of the hardest things that we have, is to hear what use of the collection your patrons make, or where the difficulties they are or they have in finding the material. So I'm always happy to hear when someone has a great tip for configuring their systems, but I think we're very interested in knowing how this helps. And I think the expectations are a little bit different for this knowledge base or discovery service than maybe some of the other commercial products. So I'd be interested to hear what other people think about that as well.
That's great. You mentioned that we will have our e-monograph collections being made available hopefully as soon as this week. I certainly think that we'll definitely contact all of the registrants for this webinar to let them know that. I think that would be great. And hopefully if people are interested in the further releases, maybe we can post those to CRL Connect for those who have not yet signed on to our online newsletter. I encourage you to do that. There have been some questions coming in here, and one was a bit of a procedural question about what we were searching. The question came in: what did we search on in Collection Manager to find the CRL collections? The particular user wasn't able to find it under Center for Research Libraries as a provider search.
You weren't able to find it yet because they're still private. As soon as we make them available as a global collection, you'll be able to find them. But I would encourage you to look for the LMC collection, because as a CRL member, you have full access to the Law Library Microform Consortium database.
Mm-hmm. One of the questions related to the frequency of the updates. How often is CRL intending to update the global collections? Is it going to be ongoing or a scheduled basis?
That consideration, I think, was one of the main reasons why we decided to load the records on our own, even though it turned out to be a much larger project than we anticipated, and we had a number of hurdles just to get to the point where we are now. We chose loading the records ourselves. Initially meant that we could do that ongoing, and because we digitize material every day, we anticipate that we will update the knowledge base collections with the same frequency that we add the records to our catalog. So whether or not it's every day, it will certainly be multiple times a week.
I think that speaks well in part to the the frequency of the updates and relating to the initial release of collections. Do we have an estimate of when the e-serials or e-newspapers might be available? You mentioned that there's some problems in the configuration of those holding statements. Do we know how long that might be until those are released?
I think we have been trying to automate the creation of the KBART holdings information for the newspapers and serials. Because of the way we gathered the data for our own digital delivery system, it may not be possible, and we may have to add the data manually. If we do have to do it manually, I think what we'll do is just open the collection right away. We'll put in a small number and make it a global collection, and then just continue to add to it every day until they're all in. Because at that point, it doesn't, there's no benefit to keeping it private if we have to manually update the data. So I think it should not be very long until there are some serials in newspapers, and then we will continue to add them, hopefully every day until we have completed. But they're only about, I think they're just about 5,000 newspapers and serials titles. That will translate into a large number of holdings records in the KBART metadata, but we will begin working on that.
We have perhaps a best practices tip coming in from a user. Claremont Colleges has mentioned that they have CRL set up in WorldCat Discovery so that held by CRL displays prominently. They also say that they offer a limiting facet to CRL holdings. So that will really improve the local discovery of CRL records in their own discovery system for their users.
Yeah. I think I would encourage everyone to look at the Claremont College catalog. I think it's a very good example of what you can do when you do purchase or use the WMS for your ILS. I think it's a very good option. I think the librarians that I have had some email exchanges are very knowledgeable, and I think would be happy to help if you have any questions about this. So I would say definitely take a look at their configuration. I think it's very good.
Yeah, do go to their site and search for the Irish Times and Daily Advertiser. Amy used that as one of the examples earlier on, and if you search there, you can see an example of how to do that. So after this webinar, you can go do that. Don't leave us yet.
Yeah, and I suppose we can, with all of the follow-up information, we can provide a number of record queries or links to records. So if you wanted to test your configuration, something like that, we can definitely include that.
One of the participants mentioned receiving news from OCLC that our collections were available. I'll just quote this so that everybody's hears it from the mouth of the participant. OCLC announced your collections prematurely, so that has caused some confusion. I had to email OCLC to find out why I could not find you in Collection Manager. Yeah, I don't have information on that.
Yeah, yes, I am sorry about that. That was part of, that was some of the drama, I guess, or difficulties as we were preparing for the webinar, or preparing to get our records in the knowledge base. I think we've been working with OCLC for a long time to try to make CRL records more discoverable through all of these systems, and so I think we were all very anxious to spread the word that we were very close to the end, and perhaps we're right there. And I think what happened was, when we uploaded our first group of records into the knowledge base, and in anticipating the webinar, we wanted to create that global collection. So I think OCLC, the person I was working with at OCLC, did turn it on, but then we discovered that we had uploaded monographs, but not indicated that they were ebooks. And that's that's like the one field that you can't overlay on. So we basically had to delete the collection and recreate the collection in order to fix that error. So there are a number of fields with the KBART that you can overlay, but whether or not it's an ebook or a serial is not one of them. So sorry about that.
Soon the actual content in there will catch up to the news announcement, so thanks for your patience on that. One final question we've received steps away a little bit from discovery and more into perhaps policy or our services. Amy, you mentioned that because we scan on demand, sometimes we're creating only partial digital collections. There was a question as to whether there was any consideration towards digitizing the rest of a run for an e-serial or an e-newspaper?
We have thought about that, and I think there have been times where we have actually tried to fill in. Rather than continuing on at the end, if we've already digitized, something from 1925 and then something from 1936, it might be our choice to try to fill in. But truthfully, it can be difficult for us to keep up with the ILL request-based digitization, and also to have this sort of plan scanning on top of it doesn't always. It would take a lot more investment, and we would certainly be open to that, I think, if that was of importance to the members, and we could find the funds for that investment. But
maybe just bringing that back around to the discussion of the records itself. When we do fill in, or when we create additional holdings for a particular record, those automatically get updated into the KBART information, so that if we've added a year or 5 years, those KBART records will be updated as we go along.
Yes, they will. They won't be automatically updated, but we will manually update them every day, or several times a week at least. We'll be keeping up. We have to do that for our own catalog, and we have to do that for the WorldCat database. So it will be just one more step in that process. We'll update the holdings locally, update it in WorldCat, and update it in the knowledge base.
Great. Well, I think we're about out of time. We've received a number of positive comments and acclamations for your work, Amy, and your team's work in making this happen, so that once these go public in Collection Manager, we encourage our members to make use of those and to relate back to us, as Amy suggested, how you're finding that these are helping discovery of CRL resources and how the patrons are getting access to this material. We're now going to wrap up this, so thank you, Amy, so much for that presentation, and this will be recorded and made available soon.
Hi, this is Virginia Kerr at CRL. Thank you, Amy, for this very interesting and detailed presentation, and timely as well. We do, I want to emphasize what James just mentioned, that the recording of this presentation will be available soon. We'll notify everyone who registered for the webinar when the recording is available on our YouTube channel, and we encourage you to spread the word among your colleagues. If you have any suggestions about places where we should publicize this within the CRL community, we would appreciate that, because as I said, it's clearly very timely information. I want to remind you at this point of some upcoming CRL events. Next week, we have our annual Global Resources Collections Forum to be held here in Chicago on April 14th and 15th. At Risk, Stewardship, Due Diligence, and the Future of Print, which will explore potential for collaboration on print archiving and access to particularly serials in print. And while that has been available for registration on site here in Chicago, we have also made streaming available. You can go to the event webpage on our website and register to have access to streaming if you can't make it to join us here in Chicago. We also have coming up a couple of webinars in May after we get finished with our annual meeting next week and the Collections Forum. So we have our ever popular CRL Collections and Services General Introduction webinar on May 11th, and that's very useful, obviously, for orienting new staff or just refamiliarizing yourselves with various aspects of our collections and services. We will talk in a general way about some of the things that Amy has talked about today about discovery, but we'll also go into more into our digitization, into our loan services, etc. And then later in May, on the 25th, we have the second in a series of webinars presented by Portico staff This one will look specifically at Portico tools, which can be used for local collection management analysis, for consideration of archiving, comparing against what has been digitally archived, what serials have been digitally archived by Portico. We do hope when you exit today off of your web platform, there is a survey available. Your feedback is extremely important to us in planning our future programming, so we hope you'll take a few minutes to fill out that survey. Again, a reminder of the recording being available on YouTube, and ways to connect with to continue connecting with CRL, to become aware of the events and programs and services that we offer through our website. If you're not already signed up, please do sign up for Connect, which is our e-newsletter, which comes out every 2 to 3 weeks, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you so much again for joining us today.